Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ethylene Ironcloud Two Dogs. I am here from the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center from the Indian Child Trauma Center. Paulette Running and I are bringing to you today a webinar information on Community of Practice Strategic Planning Toolkit, Planning for Sustainability. It's hard to believe that this is the final session of the Community of Practice Strategic Planning Toolkit webinar series. We've had previous webinars and we hope that they were helpful. We would like to talk to you today about the different types of sustainability, and we'd like to talk to you about collaboration, partnerships, strategic planning, and how we can realize our goals and continue efforts beyond a particular grant period. So we're very happy to be here today, and we are going to be bringing you some critical information for the next 90 minutes. So welcome, everybody. I'm Ethylene Ironcloud Two Dogs. I'm the Senior Advisor with the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. I'm here with Dr. Paulette Running-Wolf. She's a Technical Assistance Coordinator with the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. We were going to be joined by Natalie Stites, a Technical Assistance Coordinator with our organization. However, she had a family emergency to take care of, so we wish her and her family the best, and we will miss her. So why don't we go forward and have an opening. I would like to share today that I have been very blessed today. My granddaughter came into the world this morning about 10:20 Mountain Time. So she's only about an hour and a half old now. She was 8 pounds, 14 ounces. And if those of you that have ever witnessed a birth, you know how amazing it is, what a gift that we've received, our family. So I'd like to really focus in our opening on the blessings that the Creator has given us, and I'm also going to ask for a blessing for our meeting. In my Lakota language, Tunkashila Wopila Kanka Ungeni Chaupi. Tunkashila leampetu tkakojawa makaaka hikirila wopila tkanka echichia. Tunkashila taku wongwa kapiki leampetu ki oyakapi na unshunkilapie hechel oyate na wakanja ki iwashtepikte. Grandfather, Creator, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the gift of life today through my little grandchild and all the other babies that were born on this day, and we ask that you bless our meeting so that the children and the people will benefit from our work, all my relations. Thank you so much for bearing with me. And I'd like to introduce our staff. Our director is Dr. Dolores Subia Bigfoot. Our assistant director is Dr. Jamie Barktis. Our project manager is Courtney Yarholer. Our project manager, too, is Jamie Braden. Our project administration person is Gandra Laval. We also have, again, Dr. Paulette Running-Wolf, who will be one of your guest speakers today, Anna Clow, Muskogee Creek, Natalie Stites from Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, Jerry Weisner, Muskogee Creek, and Aaron Thinout from the Sichungu Rosebud Sioux Tribe. So here's our agenda. We're going to be doing a welcome, and we did the welcome, and we're going to be doing a tech review. So I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea right now, and then I'll come back to the agenda. Good morning, Chelsea.
sorry about that. Hi, everybody. This is Chelsea. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we're doing the Community Practice Strategic Planning Toolkit Session 9, Planning and Sustainability. My name is Chelsea Fish, again, and I'm the Project Support Specialist supporting this contract in the Technical Assistance Center today. And myself and everyone on the team is happy to have you all with us. Before we get started with the presentation, I'd like to go over housekeeping for today's session. First, I'd like to mention how everybody will ask questions and encourage everyone to communicate down in the chat box to the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You're going to use that chat box again to ask questions, chat with your peers, and most importantly, to let us know if you're ever experiencing any technical issues. Please always note that participant microphones will remain muted for today's session until we reach a point in today's session where we will ask questions. You'll be able to engage and with the presenters and things like that through the chat box. On your screen right now is an example of chat-like activity. So maybe some things that if you're wondering, is this appropriate to write in the chat box? Is this not appropriate? We always encourage you to share your thoughts. If you have any comments whatsoever, go ahead and enter them into the chat box. Somebody might also be feeling the same way or have the same idea or be able to build upon that conversation. Again, chat us anytime if you're experiencing technical difficulties. Always remember that if you lose internet connection on your screen or if it isn't working, if the platform itself isn't working properly, just first troubleshoot that issue by hitting the refresh button in your browser. Let's go ahead and start using the chat box now. I'd like everybody to introduce yourself and let us know what community you're coming from or what tribal youth community you're supporting. Secondly, it's important to know how you all will ask questions or when questions will be answered, etc. So at any given time, participants can write questions into the chat box. Presenters and hosts will try our best to answer those questions as they come up. Of course, we always encourage you to enter your questions as soon as you think of them so they're not forgotten or laid at the wayside. However, if we're not able to get to them, we may respond later on in the presentation, or if we don't have an answer for you, we'll follow up via email or something like that at a later time. There's also a block of time reserved at the end of today's presentation for additional questions and a more focused environment for questions and answers. Lastly, in order for you to let us know if the information was helpful today or how you liked the presentation, there's going to be a web link advertised to you at the end of today's presentation. It's really important that everybody share their feedback and their suggestions so that we know how successful we are in communicating important information to everybody. And it's important for us to know how we can build upon that and get better at that. So please take the opportunity to complete that survey at the end of today's session. That's all I have for you. Back to you, Eslene. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. So we are going to be talking about different types of sustainability. We're going to be looking at a tool and strategies for planning for sustainability. We're going to learn from examples of other projects experience with sustainability, and we hope that you all can give your input with that. And strengthening sustainability efforts. Most likely all of you have been involved in sustainability initiatives and have some great experience to share. Then we'll do a wrap-up and closing. So that is our time together today. So what is your definition of sustainability? Type in the chat box. We'd like to hear from you. What do you think when you hear sustainability, what comes to mind? Sustaining your program, sustaining a practice, sustaining a strategy. Longevity, Anna saying. Thank you, Anna. Yes. How can we keep it going? Continue, Val says. Keep it going. Don't let it end. Jill shared room for long-term growth and progress. Yes. Tina, continuing success with current and new programs, adding on to what you're already doing. Thank you, Tina. So I'd like to ask also, and this is just a rhetorical question, maybe we should have sustainability in big letters on a poster on our wall. How are we going to achieve sustainability? How are we going to sustain sustainability? So Sasha shared keeping our programs running, continue doing the things that have been working in our community. Yes, that's very important. I think all of us have been involved in projects that were so wonderful, and yet when the funding ran out, then we had to stop the activities, right? So how do we prevent that from happening? So thank you so much for sharing. So a definition of sustainability is, and this is according to Webster's, so to cause to continue as an existence or a certain state or in force or intensity to keep up, especially without interruption, flagging, or to prolong. So we are all pretty much on the same page as far as sustainability is concerned. So I'm going to turn it over to Paulette right now. Welcome, Paulette. She might be having some technical difficulties. Which sometimes happens, so I'll go ahead and review the different types of sustainability. Okay, there's cultural and spiritual. Maintaining and strengthening connections to cultural and spiritual lifeways. I was talking with an organization recently about infrastructure development, and we started talking about money and funding and policies and procedures and building, those types of infrastructure items. And then we started talking about relationships, nurturing relationships with one another as employees, as collaborators, working to nurture relationship with our spiritual resource people, our spiritual resource entities, and that's a different type of sustainability. So if you think about cultural and spiritual sustainability, then that is a lot of times the foundation for organizations. Environmental sustainability. Sustaining life that will allow our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to live comfortably in a friendly, clean, and healthy world. I think we all want that for our children, our grandchildren, and the future generations, to have an environment that is clean, that is healthy, and we would want to work toward that. So there's social sustainability, such as the ability of a social system to function at a defined level of social well-being and harmony indefinitely. So, for example, if you have a family or an organization and you want to work on social sustainability, one of the areas we might look at, like I mentioned earlier, was relationships. How do we nurture and maintain healthy relationships so that we can help each other achieve our goals as a family or as an organization? Economic sustainability, the ability of an economy to support a defined level of economic production indefinitely. So these are different types of sustainability, and can you think of others? What are other types of sustainability? And feel free to chat in the chat box, a question, a comment. This is about what you are doing, and we're just facilitating, bringing you information to consider and to think about, and hopefully to be helpful in your work to sustain your important work.
Kathleen, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. I apologize. I don't know what happened. It just stopped. I could hear you, but you guys couldn't hear me.
Oh, okay. So did you want to make any comments on that, Paulette?
No, I just think that the only comment that I would make is that we seldom, most grants seldom provide an opportunity to really focus in and zero in on sustainability. And it's such a crucial thing because, as all of you know, the many grants that you get in are just for that grant funding period, and then you close the doors and you start all over again. So it's just such a key issue for sustaining the services that are so desperately needed in our communities.
I agree. Do you want to comment on this quote, Paulette?
Sure. It's a nice picture, some fancy dancers there. Sustainable communities foster commitment to place, promote vitality, build resilience to stress, act as stewards, and forge connections beyond the community. And I think that's a really good statement, quote, because it really provides you some framework that it's not just from within the community, that you really need to reach out. And in terms of sustainability, that's a crucial issue.
Thank you. And speaking of a framework, so some of you, if not all of you, were a part of the webinars, participated in the past webinars that we had. We started with the community readiness assessment. You walked through that tool. You compiled some responses from your community. You use that information to plan your project, to inform your project. We developed a mission and vision during a webinar. We identified needs and resources, and I'd like to, I guess, just mention that, you know, as far as resources and resource mapping, Paulette, did you want to comment on resource mapping? I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later on, but I just thought you'd comment.
There are several things. I mean, that resource mapping is actually, people sometimes call it asset mapping or environmental scanning or community resource mapping. But basically, and I think there's a slide coming up, we'll talk about this, it provides an opportunity for you to examine all of the resources that are available for youth and families in your community. And there probably are many that you're not aware of because we're busy promoting our programs, implementing our programs, and providing services. But often new resources come available or resources are no longer available because they weren't sustained, grants weren't sustained. So having that resource mapping completed really identifies the areas that are not, and services that are not available, so that you can incorporate that into your planning, or else services that may become available in the very near future. So involving them in collaboration. So resource mapping really gives you an opportunity to start at the ground floor and examine what you have available in your community. And there's a lot of resources, and I think we also have a tendency to forget to involve the cultural, spiritual aspects of our community and how important those are as resources and how we can be inclusive of those.
Very important. Thank you for that. So the strategic planning journey starts with, you know, getting input from your community, and like Paulette said about the cultural and spiritual aspects of our work, you know, in integrating that, using that as a foundation for our work. So we developed through a webinar a program action plan for implementation, and another webinar that we did was on logic model development. And by the way, these are all available on YouTube, and you'll see at the end of this presentation, you'll see a link there. And you're all welcome to have these slides also. We also have had a webinar on data collection, and we plan for tracking performance measures. We had a webinar on communication and partnership planning. And so all of these webinars, these tools that were provided were to lay the foundation for sustainability. Now, what I like about this approach and this model here that you see on the slide is that you can go back to community readiness assessment. Maybe you want to re-examine your responses. Maybe you want to ask some more questions of the community. Maybe you want to revisit your mission and vision and say, are we really being true to our mission and our vision? So you can go back, and it doesn't end at communication and partnership plan. You can go back and revisit and re-strengthen. So this approach allows for that. So we have to look at sustainability from the perspective of, how do we, first of all, what are the challenges to sustaining a program? And this quote here talks about root cause analysis approach. And the quote is about finding the root causes, resolving the root causes. All problems arise from their root causes. No other explanation is possible. So if we look at collaborative thinking on this slide, then we have separate unit thinking, like I am the universe. The problem is with others. Wary of change, focus on short-term results. And the whole system thinking is I am part of the whole, I am part of the problem. Strategic, and on. Collaborative thinking versus adversarial thinking. So if we were to look at this root cause analysis compared to collaborative thinking, then we could see the challenges that exist in terms of sustaining projects, programs, initiatives. What is the root? So, for example, whenever we talk about our extended families in our communities, each one of us on this webinar are a part of a system, a family system, an extended family system. And we all have certain responsibilities, certain roles in our extended family, and we all want to help each other. We want to make sure that the younger generation have every opportunity to realize their full potential. So that kind of thinking was historical. But what happened, I believe, is that we become disconnected a lot of times from that type of thinking because of the boarding school, because of different historical traumatic experiences that we've had as Indigenous people. So adopting the mainstream thinking of, I'm the one that's important and I have to look out for myself, that's a worldview that has been adopted or that is prevalent in the Western way of thinking. In the Indigenous way of thinking, then we looked out for each other. I think we were the true collaborators, and we were the ones that, knew that if we didn't help each other, that, the whole tribe, the whole village, would fail, would suffer. So, and our children would suffer. So we have to really look at those roots, and this speaks to that. So as far as community readiness, then you all participated in the webinars. You began planning, you conducted and scored interviews, you mobilized your community with this tool that was provided to you. And then you integrated community readiness assessments, the results, into your plan. So if you recall the community readiness assessment, the goal is to ensure that the voices of the tribe and community are heard so that they're invested, engaged, and ready to address an issue. And they can be used to assist your project in the development or the revision of your implementation plan. So these are very valuable, a very valuable tool to have. I'll turn it over to Paulette now.
Okay, we're on the mission statement. Our mission statement clearly articulates what we do, why we do what we do, who we do it for, what values drive our mission. It focuses on the here and now. It's usually very short and concise. Often we have a tendency to make mission statements very elaborate, and I think the shorter and more concise you can make it zeroes in on exactly what you intend to do. So the overall focus of the grant. Next slide. What are vision statements? They provide a visualization of what the organization intends to ultimately become. They present a description of your project or organization as you'd like to see it in 5, 10, or more years. And all strategies and objectives are directed towards the vision of the organization. And that vision statement really has it provides an opportunity, if you work with your advisory councils, to really have input and collaborate on the vision and mission and vision statements. It very much provides an opportunity to connect so that you all are looking at the same vision into the future, and you can all agree upon that, and that's the primary purpose for coming together. So you want to ask these questions when drafting a vision statement. Is it feasible? Is it inspiring? Is it concise? Is it appealing to stakeholders? And is it consistent with the mission? So those are all very good questions to ask yourself when you've completed them. Are these factors all addressed? I think sometimes we get to going and it's possible that we forget what we're all about, and that's the stakeholders. So making sure that they have an opportunity to participate in establishing and confirming a vision and mission, the more successful you will be. It also is really a starting point for many of the advisory councils that are helping guide your program. So strongly suggest that not just one person, the program director or the program coordinator, work on these, but more of your advisory council participate, because it builds collaboration and it builds relationships.
Just a comment on the mission and vision, Paulette. I think we discussed this during that webinar, but a lot of times there is mission drift, where we organize for a certain mission, a certain purpose, and then we find out that we need to, address something else. And so we drift away from our mission, which isn't a bad thing or wrong thing. It's just important to keep in mind that, okay, if we need to revise our mission, then, let's do that so that we're consistent, with our mission and vision. I just wanted to make that comment.
That's a very good point. And once you make them, they don't just get archived. Go back and periodically check every 6 to 12 months and see if you're online and you're on target with your objectives. Are they all moving towards those mission statements and vision statements? It's a very good point, Kathleen.
Yeah, I worked for an organization once that the leadership had the employees at any given time, somebody would come up to them, and it was unplanned and it was spontaneous. They would say, what is the mission statement of our organization? What is the vision statement of our organization? And a lot of times people were, would have to refer back to their written materials. But in the end, what leadership was promoting was that we need to know our mission. We need to know our vision. And if anybody comes up to you and asks, well, what do you do there? What's the purpose? Then you can respond, very readily if you memorize it and if you live it and, know it. So very important.
Very true. Very true. Okay. Needs and resources. I'll talk a little bit about this. I think often we have very specific needs identified early on, like, oh, we just can't get in to get our kids assessed for substance abuse. It takes 6 to 12 weeks or 3 months or to get into treatment. We focus on those immediate, ever-present needs that are glaring in our faces, and don't take the time to really look around us and do that resource mapping. I think we talked about a little bit earlier, how important it is that we take the time and look at not only just the programs around you and the services that are focused on services to youth, but there may be other resources nearby. Often the schools will get grants in and you can partner with them, or local mental health agencies have new programs for services that are being provided. But looking around and doing a real good resource mapping. And again, this is just like the mission and vision statements. Go back periodically and do that resource mapping. See if things have changed. If they have changed, or if you're anticipating a change, maybe a program is closing, then it's really important that you be able to fill in that gap of services and do some initial planning before they close their doors so that you can pick up the pieces and move on from there. So resource mapping is a very useful tool. It is sometimes tedious, and it makes sense to do it frequently, but it's highly useful in the end and will help keep your program on target. But resource mapping provides kind of like the foundational area of building your program. Not only do you identify needs and resources, but you identify other opportunities to adjust your system so it really can become a system of care. So think about that in terms of resource mapping.
And sometimes, Paulette, we don't even know what resources are out there, what opportunities are out there. For example, I was visiting with somebody recently about mental health first aid training that's going on in our community, and they haven't heard about it. And it's a free training. You know, it's they get a manual and they get certified in mental health first aid, and they were very excited about it. So one of the suggestions might be to have a person assigned to be like a resource coordinator. You know, maybe that wouldn't be their title, but, you know, somebody that is assigned to seek out resources, seek out opportunities, visit with people, go to meetings, you know, and see what's out there. Because sometimes we get so focused on our work, which isn't a bad thing and it's not a negative thing. Sometimes we get insulated, you know, from the community. So we have to reach out, extend, and engage ourselves, you know, with the community, and we might find out more about, you know, other resources.
Exactly.
So the purpose of an implementation plan, if you recall from the previous webinar, it's to outline how the goals and objectives of your project will be carried out. And again, you know, if we don't have a plan, then we're not being guided by anything. We don't have a direction, you know. So this implementation plan is really, really critical to making sure that we have the direction and the parameters and how we're going to do that. What are our action steps? So we discussed in a previous webinar about using SMART objectives: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So we gave examples, you know, about how to do that, how to develop those action steps using the SMART objectives. And this is yes.
Can I interrupt just for a second? I just wanted to back up one slide.
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that both the SMART objectives and the action or implementation plan, I like action plan better, are very much opportunities for you to be accountable to your community and to the funding agency. So making them as detailed as possible is really important, and that's what the SMART objectives are about. It's refining. All of you more than likely submitted goals and objectives in your grant application. And some of you choose not to take this opportunity to make your goals and objectives into SMART ones. But if you should choose to, it's going to really make it a very process-oriented approach that you can check back on. And they're very helpful if you're detailed and you have a timeline. You go back and look at them each time. But this is really unusual, and I always stress this with grantees, that taking the time to go ahead and make your objectives, goals, and objectives SMART really zeroes in on exactly the tasks that need to be done. And it provides an idea of, all right, who's responsible for this and what is the next step. So as you move along, your action plan, your first year is probably your planning year, and you'll get a lot of that done. And then we tend to sit back on our laurels and say, okay, we're moving right along, when in fact you should be focusing on refining that. And following your action or implementation plan allows you that opportunity to carry out those tasks that should be accomplished on an ongoing basis, such as sustainability. So that's my biggest recommendation. Those two are key steps in becoming an effective grant manager. So keep that in mind.
Yes, and again, they can be revisited, right? Your action steps. Maybe they weren't specific enough, or maybe the measures have to be refined or revised. Maybe the achievable part wasn't as feasible as we thought and easy to put into action. I use an example of a healing camp. The healing camps that we do in our community, there is 1,000 details in putting a healing camp together. And thankfully, we have a lot of volunteers. We have a lot of people that want to see these healing camps happen, so they come together. Details like who's going to haul the teepee poles, who's going to, who has gas money for the truck to haul the teepee poles, who's going to haul hay for the horses, and those types of details that we tend to overlook, And afterwards, after the healing camp, who's going to haul everything back? Who's going to wash the pots and pans, So we just have to be, like you said, as specific as possible, and realistic as possible. So thank you for that. So speaking of action steps, if you recall, we use this as an example. So this is a SMART objective. It's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it's time-oriented. So this objective is to reduce crime and violence by 20% in a housing cluster community using a culturally specific approach by the end of year 1. So how do we do that? What's the outcome if we do that? We think one of the things that we'd like to achieve is that children residing in the housing cluster will have less exposure to and experiences of violence and will feel safer in their community. That's why we're doing this. So then look at the specific action steps. Ask yourself, what are the steps needed to accomplish this SMART objective? And the task should be completed in sequence. So number 1 might be create process for ongoing community input partnership. When do you want to begin this? Month 2 through month 6? Who's the person responsible? The project coordinator in partnership with community leaders? What are the potential barriers and strengths to overcome this? So the strengths that we have natural community leaders, we have natural community supports. Our barriers might be community mistrust. For example, oh no, another program that's going to tell us what to do and how to live. Some of you might have heard that, where people get tired of programs because they come in and say, well, this is what's wrong with you and this is how we're going to address it. And they don't really, engage the community in asking them, well, what can be done? So a milestone might be, how will you, more specifically, how will you know you have achieved this action step? So, for example, the creating process for ongoing community input and partnership. A milestone might be planning notes. You have something to refer back to. You have a sign-in sheet. You can show that, you did engage the community. You have outcomes, next steps, who's responsible. And what I really like about, these action planning and, engaging with the community is that there's benefits that come out of there that you don't even realize. For example, a byproduct might be a written protocol for community partnership. There's certain protocols that we have that in each community that would be more, if used, would be more effective in engaging the community. So this is an example of a SMART objective. And then we reviewed logic models. So why do we need a logic model for sustainability planning? Well, logic models, they provide a graphic, visual, and simple way of showing what your program is going to do. So if you were to take a logic model, one page, to a funder or to a community group and say, we want to sustain this project because we've seen, benefits, we've seen good things come out of this, and this is how we're going to do it. This is how we did it, and this is the change that we did see as a result of our program activities. So those logic models are very helpful and useful in terms of showing, what you want to do, how you're going to do it, how you're going to measure it, the change that's going to come out of it. We did, in that webinar on logic models, we did talk about the, drawbacks. The downside of logic models is that sometimes they don't, allow for unanticipated activities. So we have to be careful about that too. And again, this is the logic model example. We're not going to go through it in detail, but we just wanted to share this. And like I said, these slides are available to you for your use, and you can study them in greater detail. But for those of you that were on our webinar on logic models, you're familiar with this. So again, the strengths of logic models are they're visual, they're process-oriented, they're relationship-focused, and they're performance-based. So when we talk about performance, then we build in measures and indicators to show when and if the program is achieving its outcome. So Paulette, do you have any comments as far as like how evaluation is integrated into logic models?
Sure. I think logic models, the process of, laying out your logic model so it's very visual and understandable. A part of that logic model is making sure that you've included whatever outcome measures that you're anticipating that you'll monitor. For instance, one of the we talk about this a little bit later, but one of the national evaluation outcome measures is the percentage of kids that have been screened for substance abuse or substance use. Now, if that piece is not in that logic model, it kind of hangs off to the side, and you sometimes lose sight of it and don't collect the needed data. So the logic model should frame all aspects of the program that you are implementing, and that's an important piece about that. If something's left out, then it's real easy to leave that out in terms of your planning or your action planning or even in your implementation plan. They need to be consistent and comparable.
I agree. Very, very useful.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of that evaluation, integrating it into the logic model, then there's data collection planning. We have to have that as a way of telling our program story. So for example, I worked for a project before that interviewed families about the services that they received, and it really wasn't about was the service good or was the service bad. It was more about what did you gain? How did your family get strengthened from the services and activities that you've received, and what difference does it make, So we have to have a way of telling our program story. It also provides information for decision making. So maybe we said, well, we're going to, focus 50% of our time on program services for families or for youth. And then we look back at our calendar, we look back at after reviewing what we've done in the past 6 months, and we find out that we're doing only 20% of time on services. So this data collection is very important for decision making, for program development, resource allocation, funding, and improvements of services. Sometimes we can find answers to questions that aren't readily available. So we might ask a specific question like, what are the strengths that youth have from a certain school? What do they rely on for substance abuse prevention? Because we notice that the youth from that school have a lower rate of substance use and abuse. So like Paulette was sharing, we really have to build in those evaluation activities in order to tell our story.
And thing I would add,
sure.
I was just going to add how important it is that data collection plans are established early on, not only for the required outcome measures that OJJDP is requiring you to answer, but also in terms of local level. That basically, one of the points that she made was that it's important to be able to tell your program story. Well, part of that story is making decisions around resources. Part of that story is identifying continuation funding. And a part of that story is quality improvement. And if you're like most people, and me and myself included, and I'm an evaluator, the first time I heard an evaluation, I equated that with math in my mind. And so I shy away from it because I was never very good in math in school. So we tend to limit ourselves because of our lack of knowledge in a certain area. And by doing a logic model and establishing a data collection plan, it very much addresses the issue. And you can start to see what an important piece of your strategic planning that data collection is, and the many uses that it can be used for. Often we collect data just because we're forced to. It's a grant requirement. And we do that, and we don't take a look at it. We never return to it. We never use it for continuation planning. And that's a poor way to approach the process. The best way is to really focus on defining those areas of data collection. Who's going to do it? Who's going to be responsible? And then taking the time to examine the data as it comes in periodically, discussing it, figuring out ways to share that information with your community so you can show that you are being successful. And the culture-based approaches that you're using, or the practice-based or the evidence-based approaches, really are working for our kids. So having that information is crucial, and being able to figure out how to share it appropriately, or even in terms of analyzing it. You might have one example, one set of data that tells you X equal Y. Well, if somebody else looked at that same data, they said, well, what about, for instance, if this is the case with this kid, it's slightly different, it doesn't fit. Well, your program, you should be able to analyze that and identify those areas that are not working. So taking that time to discuss it with your advisory council, review it, understand it, and then what steps do you need to take after that is really an important part of your project. And it also promotes collaboration, not only with your partners, but with your community. As they see you are trying and you are being successful, you'll start to garner more and more community support.
I agree, Paulette. The data collection is, and analysis, and writing it up, sharing that would lend so much to sustainability. People will see what you're doing and how important it is. And establishing performance measures are really important. So whenever we say performance measures, what do we mean? Those are indicators aligned with our outputs, our outcomes, we hope to achieve, how we will measure it. So the data collection is geared to sources that can help determine if a strategy is effective to achieving hoped for outcomes. So the example that we used before, this is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Tribal Youth Program, a target behavior performance measure. So the output measure is substance use. The definition of that measure is the number and percent of program youth who have exhibited a decrease in substance use during the reporting period. And how do you do that? Self-report, staff rating, those are likely data sources. So the data that the grantee collects are number of program youth served during the reporting period with the noted behavioral change related to substance use, the total number of youth receiving services for target behavior during the reporting period. And then the percent, you would take A divided by B. So that's actually from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, a specific example of a performance measure. Okay, so we've established that the data collection, the logic models, all of those are very critical elements of sustainability planning. The other element that we'd like to review with you is a communication plan. So we have a framework that is formulated to provide a process for either public or non-public messaging and interpreting messages. And it's a tool to help with accomplishing your project goals. We would like to emphasize that one communication product or one campaign may not be enough. So for example, perhaps you want to develop public service announcements for the radio or the TV about, promoting prevention, for example, in your community. But you need to look at your audience. Who are you trying to target? Is it youth? Then your message might be different for youth than for elders. You may want to think about that, how your communication plans, your campaigns, your products, who they're geared toward. So we'd like to ask you, what is the most critical most critical factor in sustaining a project or initiative? In your opinion, in your experience, what do you see as the most critical factor in sustaining a project or initiative? We see some people typing.
You might want to reflect back on a previous grant or project. What did you do to sustain it? Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Sure. Kathleen says community involvement and buy-in, very, very important. If we're doing planning or implementing something without community, then it's almost sure to not be successful, not be effective. Keeping staff members at the same position. Ron, do you want to clarify that? I'm really interested in that comment about keeping staff members at the same position. And while he's doing that, Anna talks about staff connectivity. Jill, collaborating and coordination. Stay on task. That's very important. Tribal council support. Yes, that's very, very important. Focus on the vision, Anna says. I think that's critical. Revisit the vision. Revisit the mission. Tribal council support, and also I would like to add unelected community leaders. So, for example, somebody may not be on the tribal council, but they have a lot of influence in the community. So getting them engaged would be helpful to sustaining the project. So Ron talks about high turnover rate, sometimes staff staying within departments but changing roles and job duties. So you would have to go back and, if I understand that correctly, then you would have to go back, retrain, reorient people, and it just creates a time lag. So Ron, if I'm correct or incorrect in terms of, understanding what you're trying to say, excuse me for that, but that's how I see, what you're saying about the high turnover rate. Thank you for that. Communication. Joelle talks about the importance of communication in terms of sustaining a project or initiative. I think, that's something that we have to really look at in terms of developing that communication plan. What is our message to the community? And if we do have, like, say, something happen within our project, maybe that is negative, then what is our, protocol, our process for communicating with the public about that? That's something very important also. Okay, so I'm going to, Paulette, would you like to cover the sustainability plan elements?
Sure. I just wanted to add, I think that sustainability planning really needs to begin right from day one of the grant.
Yes.
That should be the most critical area that you work on, not only at the beginning and not just at the end, but throughout, because you may be able to sustain pieces or staff positions or parts of the system. You may be able to get another program to pick up if they know that that's in the forefront, that they need to sustain this project. Well, maybe they can add it to their work efforts. So that's, I think, a really an important point, that sustainability should never be left right for the end. It should be on every single agenda. All right, what progress are we making? And that's just crucial in terms of being successfully sustaining your program.
So would you say also, Paulette, that starting from the beginning, but also integrating it throughout every activity? For example, like, say, sustainability might mean, well, where's our evidence or where's our data that we did provide these services? So having a sign-in sheet at every meeting, right? And contact information, database for contact information about, like, say, people that participated, sending them meeting notes or conference proceedings, and keeping them informed about what's going on.
Exactly. I think having that as an agenda item is ideal, and that every step of the way you look at what you can accomplish. And examining the data is a real good place to focus those efforts on. If you see something being very successful, that's probably one service that you for sure want to sustain. So you begin discussing that with your partners and the community and trying to identify a way to maintain that service. So using the data for quality improvement is one piece, but also for sustaining the project is really important.
And I think Sasha brings up a good point about they're a grant and they won't be there forever, and what can be sustained without funding. What are some practices or strategies that can be sustained without funding? Because, like she says, a grant ends. So how do we keep it going? How do we sustain an important project without the grant funding? Can we share among partners? Can we divide it up in terms of, the strategies and activities that were implemented? Can we collaborate to do that? These are real important questions that we need to ask ourselves from the very beginning. So thank you for that, Sasha. It's a very, very good reminder. So we'll go into the sustainability plan elements, and this is just an example. So Paulette, would you like to cover these?
Sure. In terms of the elements of the sustainability plan, as you'll note, it says the program vision statement. We've talked about that. The background, making sure that you have an adequate summary of your history and the current state of what you wish to sustain. And that's just what Ethelene was describing. And then also look at current funding sources. List the current funding sources that could pick up where you leave off in different aspects of the program. So listing the funding sources along with their expiration dates is a critical factor, because then you know at what date these services will end unless they are sustained. So to start sustainability planning early from day one. Next slide. Sustainability elements, others are sustainability results, summarizing your program's strengths and areas for improvement. Again, looking at your data, and then looking at your results from your program's sustainability assessment tool, and we'll be talking about that just shortly. Other program elements to be sustained. Partners, list the partners involved that need to be at the table for that continued sustainability planning. And again, providing a time frame over a period of time which sustainability activities listed will be implemented. And you incorporate that right into your implementation or action plan. Those are the little details that we often overlook. And if it's in your action plan or your implementation plan, you'll pay attention to sustainability. And it really gives you a roadmap for guiding your program.
Thank you for that. I think the sustainability plan elements, we can think of others, and perhaps our participants on the webinar have ideas about, sustainability, something that's worked for them in the past. What has been your experience with past or current sustainability efforts? If you wouldn't mind sharing those, then I think we can learn from each other. They might be positive experiences, something very effective that has helped you sustain your project, your initiative. Or maybe you've had a negative experience that we can learn from, something to watch out for. So if you don't mind sharing, then type in the chat box. We'd like to hear from you.
Many of you already have an established sustainability plan, and kudos to you. And we'd really like to hear about that experience. If you could share with the rest of the audience, we'd appreciate it.
Sometimes it sounds overwhelming, sustaining a whole project, but maybe we want to, like you mentioned earlier, sustaining pieces of that project, sustaining a practice from that project. I worked with one project before that worked with a youth group, and one of their activities was to provide education and training to the youth on cultural strengthening practices. And then what they did as part of their sustainability was to write them up as a process. This is what you need. This is how you do it, the protocol. And then they shared that with the community so that even though the project ended, then other, youth would have access to that information. So I thought that was a very effective sustainability strategy. Anna talks about having experience with long-range sustainability and planning for justice systems. So collaboration was key collaboration with several stakeholders, not just the project director. So thank you for that, Anna. And Tina talks about the struggles of getting cooperation from other departments. But when people see the benefits, then they start to come around. And I think that's one of the keys, is to show the benefits. And like you said, Paulette, showing through data, a story, having a data collection process that when you think about data collection, it might not be somebody going out with a questionnaire and knocking on doors, but it might be perhaps interviews with elders. Maybe you go to a powwow, or maybe you go to a gathering and you see some elders there and you start visiting with them and you ask for permission to, write things down, what they say. So that's data collection. And that would be, once those elders pass on, you have some very valuable information to guide your project. So think about it in those terms. Paulette, any comments on your experience with past or current sustainability efforts?
If sustainability planning starts day one when you get the grant, that for instance, maybe it's a juvenile healing to wellness course that you've implemented, or maybe it's a tribal youth program. From day one, you can envision another department joining with you and perhaps picking up different aspects of the services that you're providing. So by partnering with those key stakeholders, and those are tribal programs in your area, but they're also non-tribal programs outside of your community, the non-Indian ones. So thinking about how you can support that. And at the end of it, we are going to be sharing a citation for emerging opportunities to use Medicaid funding. Well, in order to access that, there's a whole process that you need to follow through on, and process involving your state planning and your input as tribal communities for you to be able to access that and be able to support those pieces of the project that are allowable under Medicaid funding. Or maybe you understood that you just recently funded a recreational grant of some kind in your community to work with youth. Well, as a part of your sustainability plan, you'd want to bring them on immediately and have them collaborate with you on ways that you can currently join together and provide services or resources, but also planning with those community stakeholders what maybe they can pick up on. And I think that it's tunnel vision when we just use the grant to fund it for 3 years and then, oh well, what happens now? You have a tribal court that doesn't have any funding for the key positions. Well, it might be that the court clerk could take on some of the responsibilities, or it might be that the staffing positions could be kept by different funding sources, maybe child welfare services. So keeping all of those opportunities in mind, they don't happen overnight. And if you have collaborators with you at the table immediately for that planning and keeping an eye out for other opportunities as they come forward, as well as doing certain tasks, like in preparing for Medicaid funding. You need to have established third-party billing, for example. So all of those things don't happen overnight. So if you leave it till the end of the grant and you're trying to frantically establish third-party billing, well, obviously that's not going to be very successful. So really being focused with a broad vision, looking around your community and the resources in your area to identify potential supporters. And you'd be surprised how many opportunities surface through that process. So keeping that in mind, I think, is the most viable opportunity. Many times we tend to, just like I say, focus on just the project we're doing. We're trying to enhance our services, and we're busy with all of that. But you need to carve out and make sure that some of your time is directed towards sustainability planning. So keeping that on the agenda, not only with your staff, but also with your stakeholders. Because a lot of information people have at their fingertips. Unless they know you need that information, they're not able to share it. So making sure that everybody's involved is a great way to kick off those sustainability efforts.
Thank you for that. So with all of this information, that we've been providing through these webinars, these different strategies and tools for logic models, planning, implementation, action planning, SMART objectives, data plans, performance indicators. I think, it's all summed up in what Paulette was saying just now about do it from day one and make sure that you have your stakeholders, your community, in the circle to say, we want to sustain this, not because of our own individual, positions, program positions, but for the community, to benefit the community. So thank you for sharing that, Paulette and Anna and Tina. I appreciate your input. And we're going to look at an example of a program sustainability tool. So the purpose of this tool is to help you assess your program's current capacity for sustainability across several factors, organizational, contextual factors. You'll be able to, your responses will identify sustainability strengths and challenges, and then you can use the results to guide sustainability action planning for your program. This is developed out of Washington University. We do have it as a downloadable file, so if you look down there in the files for download, then you'll see the sustainability assessment tool. We're not going to go through each question, individually, but we wanted to share this with you so that you can have a tool to do a review, a self-review to look at, your strengths and your challenges, and that would help you to, to plan for sustainability. So what are your environmental supports? Who are your supportive internal and external collaborators? What's the climate like? Do you have strong champions? Do you have leadership support from within the larger organization? And a lot of times for tribal programs, that means tribal council. Those of you that have worked for tribes in the past, you know that if the tribal council focuses on your program, either positively or negatively, then that's a very, big element in terms of sustainability. Outside the organization, who are your supporters? Do you have strong public support? And how do you gauge that? Those are very important questions. Funding stability, establishing a consistent financial base for your program. What is the climate like for, the economic climate like for your program? Is your program funded through a variety of sources? We recently started a private girls' school on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and one of the areas that the girls took on right away, knowing that their school is funded by private donations, then they started making crafts, making beadwork. They had a open house and they displayed their work, and they were able to raise funds for a field trip that they wanted to take. So they understood, clearly and from the very beginning that they had a part too. They were stakeholders in the school, continuing. So we have to look at the variety of sources, and they're going to have a fundraising activity every month. So think about that. What's your stable funding? What can you count on? And what is your flexible funding? Do you have sustained funding? So these are questions that you would ask to little or no extent, to a very great extent, or not able to answer. Or maybe it doesn't apply at the time. Who are the partnerships? Cultivating connections between your program and its stakeholders. Are community leaders involved? Does the program communicate with community leaders? Are community members passionately committed to the program? Some organizations have volunteers because the volunteers believe in the program. They want to see it succeed, and they're not concerned about, getting paid or getting compensated for their work. So they'll, dive in and do some kind of volunteer work. And that's really, evidence of community engagement, community buy-in. Has the community been engaged in development of program goals? And again, that's, what we're talking about in terms of effective sustainability, having that community engagement and buy-in. Organizational capacity, having the internal support and resources to manage the program and its activities. So one of the tools that I seen was a tool where the organization has a protocol for how they interact with one another and how they interact with the public, and what are some of the standards, for their internal protocols, their internal conduct and behavior, which is really helpful in guiding them in terms of, focusing on what they're supposed to be doing, but also nurturing relationships amongst each other. Does the program have adequate staff to complete the program's goals? And Paula, I wanted to ask you about, your input on a question that I have about sustainability, which is, if you don't have a sustainability coordinator, or if you don't have an evaluator, somebody that is their whole time is dedicated to evaluation or to sustainability, what's one of your suggestions or your comments or thoughts on how projects can have that resource without having dedicated staff or time?
Well, some of you may have heard of the tribal evaluation model, and it was a group of individuals, professionals around the country, tribal people, and it turned out to be predominantly Indian women. And we came together, and that was one of the key factors that we decided we needed to focus on in terms of providing a model for tribal evaluation efforts, and that is building tribal capacity. So on one hand, it would really be nice to have the funding to have an evaluator. However, if you take on the reins and you don't have an evaluator and you don't have funding for an evaluator, it would really be helpful if you all shared in that responsibility. So as you were looking at your data, your evaluation data, typically most communities don't have any problems setting up data sets or Excel spreadsheets to monitor their data, but they may not have experience on sharing the data or developing reports. Well, invest in your community, invest in your program, and get some training to be able to monitor those spreadsheets that you're maintaining. And then how do you then taking the time and then this should really be happening at your advisory council, taking the time to go through the data and so you all understand it. And then from that point on, you can make decisions on what information needs to be shared with the tribal leadership, or what information needs to be shared with the state. You're seeking funding from them, or what information could be shared with the community so that they understand where you're going and how effective you are being with your services. So building your capacity internally is extremely helpful. So taking that time and making sure that everybody understands and has an opportunity to look at that data, and then once you've looked at it and you have some measure of understanding, then it's very, everybody becomes an owner of it. They understand it. So then they're able to help make decisions. So building tribal evaluation capacity is crucial. The other piece, I would strongly recommend that you contact your local tribal community colleges, because there's a lot of people on faculty there that would be more than happy to assist you in those efforts. Or maybe you can set up have them provide a workshop on looking at your data and how do you look at it, how do you make up a report, and so on and so forth. So you can use that, and by making sure that everybody's involved in that process, especially the stakeholders and also the staff, then there becomes this point of pride of ownership. And every time you do this, every time you look at the data, you become a little bit better at it, at understanding it, at being able to describe what it means to you and what it means to your program in terms of quality improvement, in terms of effectiveness of the intervention. Maybe you need to tweak the intervention to make it more fitting for your community. All of those aspects are possible, but you've got to think about building that into your plan. It's a training piece, actually. And in our upcoming conference in December, in Palm Springs, we're going to have an evaluation beginners session. So I think that'll be really a helpful introduction to it for everyone. It's not as scary as it seems. And I know we tend to let our fears hold us back, but plow your way through it. Get a few people together, join it, get resources, ask for your TA coordinators to assist you. We're available. We'll help you as much as we can.
Thank you so much for that, Paulette. I appreciate that, your experience and what you've seen and what you've experienced out there. And, you know, the program evaluation, like Paulette said, assessing your program to inform planning and document results. Very critical. Program adaptation, taking actions that adapt your program to ensure its ongoing effectiveness. New science, you know, what's out there that you can adapt your program to?
And can you collect data on that? And that would be local level evaluation data.
Yes.
Very, very helpful.
We talked a lot about communications, strategic communication with stakeholders. Some of you have identified that as a key element in terms of sustainability, making sure that your stakeholders are engaged. Strategic planning, using processes that guide your program's direction, goals, and strategies. So building into your calendar, for example, every quarter having a strategic planning session about where are we at, where are we going, are we being true to our mission, our vision, what's our sustainability plan, the goals, are they understood by everybody? You know, we have to look at that on an ongoing basis. So there's rating instructions in this tool. Once you've completed the tool, answered all the questions, you transfer your response to this rating sheet, and then it'll give you a score. And then you can, for each domain, and then you can look at, you know, well, I really need to improve in this area. Our project, you know, is very strong in this area, but we're challenged in this area, so let's take a look at that. So you can download that file, and you can use the results to guide sustainability action planning. So we wanted to share that with you. Again, it's available for your use. Here's some of our web links, our funding resources that you can share. These are, again, in the PowerPoint slides that are available to you. And the funding resources, now notice that some of these are time sensitive. For example, Funds for Native Language Preservation in the West, the application deadline is coming up very quickly, October 17th, so December. So take a look at those, if those might be opportunities for sustainability for you. So our review and our, you know, as far as questions that you might have, you know, we talked about sustainability planning starts from the very beginning of the project. There's different types of sustainability. You look at your cultural practices, sustainability. Identify financial and non-financial resource mapping. What does need to be sustained? Perhaps there's elements of a project that would take priority over other elements of a project. So evaluation is key to showing what the project's doing. Communication plans are very important for social marketing, for engaging the community, and effective partnerships are critical for sustainability. So we have, you know, we've covered a lot of information, and any questions or comments that you might have. Did you want to, Paulette, did you want to comment on your comment in the chat box?
Sure. I just put it in there because I wasn't sure I'd remember or have an opportunity to share it. Please take the time and use this tool. It's an excellent tool. It's not just one person that completes it, but we recommend that you have multiple people complete it, maybe your stakeholders on your advisory committee, maybe even your staff, your plan, you know, those elements. But getting people, everybody that you can think of that you think would provide helpful input and will eventually be involved in your sustainability planning efforts, get them to complete the survey, and then collectively look at the results together, collectively and collaboratively, because that will provide you really with a starting point you'll be able to see which areas that you need to focus on and build up, or which areas that you're real strong in, and you can continue to build from those. So it's a wonderful tool. I strongly recommend that you take the time to do it. Even if you've already started sustainability planning, it's great information, and it provides a real good way to look at where you're at today in terms of being prepared to sustain your program.
I agree. I actually went through it, and with an organization, as part of an organization that I'm volunteering for, and it really highlighted some areas that we need to focus on. So I really appreciate, having this tool. If there's no questions, then we'll move to the wrap-up. I'm conscious of the time. We have about 5 minutes left here. Here's our references for your review in case you want to look further into what we're talking about. We also have our web link where you can view past recordings of webinars, and this webinar will also be available in the future on this YouTube channel. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your presence, your spirit, all your good works. And, we're here as a technical assistance resource for you, so don't be afraid to call on us. And Paulette, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I think we might have skipped over one slide, the web links for possible funding resources. They're there. We've identified quite a few that you can pursue. There's 2 slides worth in there. And then also I wanted to point out we've uploaded a link to the emerging opportunities for Medicaid funding. So that's another one I would take a look at, and it will provide you with some information about the process of this new policy change that it will allow you to obtain funding for these types of services.
I appreciate that, and I think the Medicaid funding, like you mentioned, there's some very valuable information in there that can lead to sustaining your services, appropriate services. There was one project, I think you and I talked about it, Paulette, about how they were able to sustain their entire project through Medicaid funding, right? And it was for mental health services for children and families. So there is experience out there, and there is examples out there about sustaining projects and services through Medicaid, through public funding. So take a look at that. That'll be very, very helpful. And Mark put in a link there, the emerging opportunities, and that's available also for your use. So we'd just like to thank you, all of you, for participating, for being here, and for listening to us, and we hope that this information was helpful to you, and we look forward to seeing your sustainability plans. Not that it's a requirement or anything, but I just like to see if, what people are doing out there and how we can learn from them. And I know all of you are doing some very important work that needs to be sustained on behalf of our families and communities. So with that, I just like, go ahead.
One more quick comment.
Sure.
I recommend that you consider utilizing this PowerPoint presentation with your Community Advisory Committee to get them up to speed. Because I'm sure only 1 or 2 of you could have been able to. But sharing it more broadly with your advisory council and other staff is a helpful way to get it going as well.
Thank you for that. I think that's a very good suggestion. It will be recorded, so you can actually view it together, and or you can take the slides and go through them with your advisory committee or some youth, some parents. Say we want to sustain our project, and we would like your input on how we're going to do that. Here's some information that can guide us. So again, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Paulette, Mark, Chelsea, for all of your work in putting this important information together. We hope it was helpful to you, and with that, I'll do the traditional closing. So I'm going to focus on all of the work that you're doing out there for ultimately that will benefit, the children, the families, make our community strong, because your work is not in vain. It's not just a project. It's not just a grant. It's something that will feed the spirit of the people, make the spirit of the community strong, and maybe you don't realize the impact of your work, but there's a lot of good work going on out there, and I really appreciate that. So in my Lakota language, I'm going to give a closing. We thank you, Creator, for this time we've had together. Tunkashila oyate ki ushui chakilapie na tona washi yuhapi ki oichakapie wash ake wichakupie. Give our communities and our people and our programs strength so that we will become stronger as a people. Mitakuye oyasi. All of my relatives,